Keth had spent 40 years studying species across the galaxy. He had written reports on the silicon-based Mordroth, documented the hive mind communications of the Zelix, and catalogued the mating rituals of 17 different sentient races. He was the Dominion's finest observer, a scholar of unmatched reputation, and he had never once complained about an assignment. Until now, he stood before the High Council chamber, his forearms folded in a gesture of respectful disagreement. The council members sat in their elevated seats, their pale blue skin glowing softly in the chamber's light. Elder Morath, the oldest among them, had just finished explaining his new mission. Humans, Keth said, letting the word hang in the air. You want me to observe humans? We want you to observe humans in combat, Elder Morath corrected. There is a difference. Keth secondary eyes blinked in confusion. With respect, Elder, I am a cultural scholar. I study art, language, social structures. I do not study warfare. My people abandoned such things 10,000 years ago, which is precisely why we need your perspective, another council member said. The Dominion has encountered humans for less than a century. They are young, loud, and reckless. They breed quickly and die quickly. They fight wars over ideas, over land, over nothing at all. We do not understand them. And you believe I will? Elder Morath leaned forward. We believe you will observe without bias. The military observers see humans as potential threats or potential allies. The diplomatic corps sees them as trade partners or rivals. You, Keth see only truth. That is what we need. Keth wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him this assignment was beneath his abilities. But the Valanthi did not refuse the High Council. They served, observed, and reported. It was their purpose. Where will I be stationed? He asked. A human warship called the Starfall. It patrols the Mira Expanse, near Kreeth territory. If you wish to see humans in battle, that is where you will find it. 3 weeks later, Keth stood in the shuttle bay of the Starfall, surrounded by noise and chaos and the overwhelming smell of human bodies. The ship was nothing like Dominion vessels, where his people built with clean lines and quiet efficiency, humans built with exposed pipes, flashing lights, and constant noise. Alarms beeped. Crew members shouted to each other. Someone was playing music from a small device, a rhythmic thumping that made Keth head ache. A woman approached him. She was shorter than most humans he had seen, with gray-streaked hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a uniform covered in small symbols that Keth did not yet understand. Observer Keth she said, extending her hand. I'm Captain Lucy Grant. Welcome aboard the Starfall. Keth stared at her hand for a moment before remembering the human greeting ritual. He extended one of his own hands and allowed her to grip it briefly. Her skin was warm, almost hot by Valanthi standards. Thank you, Captain. I hope my presence will not be disruptive. Captain Grant smiled, and Keth noted how it changed her entire face, softening the hard lines around her eyes. We've hosted observers before. Just stay out of the way during combat situations and you'll be fine. Commander Reeves will show you to your quarters. I am. A tall man with dark skin and suspicious eyes stepped forward. He did not offer his hand. This way, he said simply, and began walking without checking if Keth followed. The next several days were an exercise in confusion. Keth had studied human culture extensively before arriving, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of living among them. They were loud in ways that served no purpose. They gathered in groups to consume food and intoxicating beverages, laughing at jokes Keth could not understand. They touched each other constantly, slapping shoulders and embracing and punching arms in gestures that seemed aggressive but were apparently friendly. They wasted energy on recreation. He observed crew members running on machines that went nowhere, lifting heavy objects, only to put them down again, hitting balls back and forth across tables. When he asked Commander Reeves about this, the man looked at him as if he had asked why they bothered breathing. It keeps us sane, Reeves said. You try being stuck on a metal box in space for 6 months, without some way to blow off steam. Kethvorin did not understand, but he recorded the observation. He attended meals in the common area, where he discovered that humans had turned eating into a social activity. They did not simply consume nutrients. They sat together, talked, argued, laughed, and shared stories. He watched a young engineer named Katie Price spend 20 minutes describing a pet animal she had left on Earth, her eyes growing wet with moisture as she spoke about missing it. "It is just an animal," Kethvorin said, genuinely puzzled. "Can you not acquire another?" The table went quiet. Katie stared at him with an expression he could not read. "He's not just an animal," she said softly. "He's my friend." Later, Kethvorin made a note in his report. Humans form irrational emotional bonds with non-sentient creatures. Purpose unclear. Possible evolutionary remnant. He observed their inefficiencies in other areas as well. Their decision-making processes involved endless discussion and debate. Their maintenance schedules included redundancies that seemed unnecessary. Their communication was filled with what they called jokes and sarcasm, hidden meanings that made simple conversations exhausting to follow. Captain Grant invited him to observe a senior staff meeting. He watched as officers argued about supply routes, personnel assignments, and something called movie night scheduling. They raised their voices, interrupted each other, and occasionally laughed at comments that seemed unrelated to the topics at hand. "Your meetings are very inefficient," Kethvorin told the captain afterward. She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "There is much unnecessary discussion. Decisions that could be made in moments take hours. And I do not understand why entertainment scheduling requires senior officer involvement." Captain Grant smiled again. That strange expression that seemed to contain emotions Kethvorin could not identify. Because morale matters. These people are far from home, facing danger every day. If they don't have something to look forward to, something normal and fun and human, they start to break down. A good captain knows that winning battles isn't just about weapons and tactics. It's about keeping your people whole. Kethvorin recorded her words but did not understand them. On his 7th day aboard the Starfall, he sent his preliminary report to the High Council. His observations were thorough and clinical. Humans were emotional, inefficient, and prone to irrational behavior. They wasted resources on comfort and entertainment. They formed attachments that served no logical purpose. They were, in his professional assessment, unremarkable. He was preparing a more detailed analysis when the alarm began to sound. Red lights flashed throughout the ship. Crew members rushed past him. Their faces suddenly hard, their movements sharp and precise. Commander Reeves appeared beside him. "Stay in your quarters," he ordered. "We've received a distress signal. Colony under attack." Kethvorin watched him run toward the bridge, and something in the air changed. The laughing, inefficient humans he had been observing were gone. In their place were strangers with cold eyes and steady hands. He followed despite his orders. Whatever was about to happen, he needed to see it. He needed to understand. The planet below was burning. Kethvorin stood at the back of the bridge, watching through the main view screen as smoke rose from what had once been cities. The colony on Mira 4 had been home to 50,000 humans. Now it was a graveyard wrapped in flames. "Report," Captain Grant said. Her voice was calm, but Kethvorin noticed her hands gripping the arms of her chair. 3 Kreeth cruisers in orbit," the tactical officer reported. "They're running harvesting operations on the surface. Life signs are scattered but present. Estimate 4,000 to 5,000 survivors, mostly concentrated in the northern settlement." "Harvesting." Commander Reeves spat the word like poison. "They're processing them." Kethvorin knew about the Kreeth. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Kreeth. They were insectoid creatures with no concept of individual life, driven by biological imperatives to consume and expand. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They took resources, and to them, other species were simply resources with useful proteins. 3 cruisers, the tactical officer continued. "We're outgunned, Captain. Standard protocol says we should withdraw and report." Kethvaran expected Captain Grant to agree. It was the logical choice. The Starfall was a single vessel against 3 enemy ships. Engaging would be suicide. Any reasonable commander would retreat, gather reinforcements, and return when the odds were better. Captain Grant stood up. "How long until reinforcements could arrive?" she asked. 6 hours minimum. "And how long until the Kreeth finish their harvesting?" The tactical officer hesitated. "Based on their patterns, 2 hours, maybe 3. Grant nodded slowly. She turned to face her crew. And Kethvaran saw something in her eyes that he did not have a word for. It was not anger. Exactly. Though anger was there. It was not determination, though that was present too. It was something deeper, something that seemed to burn from within. "Those are our people down there," she said. "I don't care if they're colonists we've never met, or citizens from the other side of Earth. They are human beings, and they are dying while we stand here calculating odds." She turned back to the view screen. "All hands to battle stations. We're going in." No one questioned the order. No one suggested alternatives. The bridge erupted into controlled activity, every officer moving to their station with purpose and precision. Kethvaran watched in disbelief. "This is irrational," he said, not meaning to speak aloud. "The probability of success is minimal. You will all die." Commander Reeves turned to look at him. His expression was hard, but there was no fear in it. "Maybe," he said, "but those people down there will definitely die if we do nothing. I can live with dying. I can't live with doing nothing." The battle began. Kethvaran had read about human warfare. He had studied their history of conflicts, their weapons development, their tactical evolution. None of it had prepared him for the reality. The Starfall moved like a living thing, diving and rolling through space as Kreeth weapons fire streaked past. Captain Grant issued orders in a steady stream, adjusting their approach based on data that seemed to change every second. The crew responded instantly, each person a part of a larger whole, moving in coordination that should have been impossible. "Launch fighters," Grant ordered. "Ground teams prep for drop. We're punching through to the surface." Kethvaran found himself pressed against a wall as the ship shuddered from a near hit. Alarms blared. Damage reports came in. A section of the lower deck had lost pressure. Casualties were mounting, and still, they pressed forward. On the surface, Sergeant Paula Vance led her Marines into hell. Kethvaran had requested to observe the ground operation, and now he wished he had not. The northern settlement was a nightmare of burning buildings and screaming civilians. Kreeth warriors moved through the streets, their blade arms cutting down anyone too slow to run. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of smoke and blood and something chemical that made his eyes water. Sergeant Vance was a small woman with short brown hair and scars on her forearms. She carried a rifle, almost as long as she was tall, and she used it with terrifying efficiency. Kethvaran watched her take down 3 Kreeth warriors in as many seconds, each shot precise, each movement economical. "Move up," she shouted to her squad. "Get those civilians to the evac point." Corporal Hector Ruiz was the squad's medic, a young man with gentle eyes that seemed wrong on a battlefield. He ran beside Vance, his medical kit bouncing against his back, a pistol in his hand that he clearly hoped he would not have to use. They pushed through the settlement, gathering survivors as they went. Kethvaran stayed close, recording everything. Though his hands were shaking so badly, the footage would probably be useless. He watched Ruiz stop to treat a wounded child, his hands steady despite the chaos around him, his voice calm and reassuring as Kreeth's screams echoed nearby. "You need to keep moving," Kethvaran told him. "Stopping puts you in danger." Ruiz looked up at him, and there was something in his eyes that Kethvaran could not identify. "She's 5 years old," he said. "She's scared and hurt, and she needs help. I'm not leaving her." A Kreeth warrior burst through a nearby doorway. Ruiz moved faster than Kethvaran thought possible, pushing the child behind him, raising his pistol, firing twice. The Kreeth fell. Ruiz turned back to the child, and continued treating her wound, his hands never trembling. "We need to move," Vance called out. "More incoming." They ran. Kethvoran ran with them, his 4 legs carrying him faster than the humans could move. But he found himself staying close to Ruiz and the child he carried. He did not know why. The evacuation point was a small plaza near the settlement's edge. Shuttles were landing, loading civilians, taking off under Kreeth fire. Vance positioned her squad in a defensive perimeter, and they held the line while hundreds of survivors streamed past. Then, the Kreeth brought reinforcements. Kethvoran saw them coming, a wave of chitinous bodies pouring down the main street. There were too many. The squad would be overwhelmed. The shuttles would not escape. "Fall back to the shuttles," Vance ordered. "Everyone move. I'll hold them here." "Sergeant," one of her Marines protested. "That's an order. Get these people out." Kethvoran watched Paula Vance stand alone in the street, her rifle raised, facing an army. She fired again and again, each shot dropping a Kreeth warrior, buying seconds for the evacuation. She took a hit to her shoulder and kept firing. She took a hit to her leg and dropped to one knee, still firing. Ruiz appeared beside her, his pistol barking, his medical kit abandoned. "Thought you might need help," he said. "I gave you an order, Corporal. Court-martial me later." They stood together, 2 humans against an endless tide, and somehow they held. They held until the last shuttle lifted off. They held until a rescue team finally reached them and dragged them both to safety. Kethvoran sat in the medical bay afterward, watching Ruiz receive treatment for a shoulder wound he had not even noticed getting. The corporal was smiling despite his pain, talking to a young Marine about something called a baseball game. "You could have died," Kethvoran said, when the Marine left. The probability of survival was extremely low. Ruiz shrugged with his good shoulder. "Yeah, probably. But Sergeant Vance needed help. Those people needed to get out. What was I supposed to do? Run away? Self-preservation is a logical response to danger." The corporal looked at him for a long moment. "Where I come from, we have a saying. A coward dies 1,000 deaths, but a brave man dies only once." He smiled again, though it was a tired smile now. "My grandmother used to say that. I never really understood it until I joined up. But now I think I do." "What does it mean?" "It means that living with yourself after you abandon someone is worse than dying to save them. Fear of death is nothing compared to the fear of being a person you can't respect." Kethvoran had no response to that. That night, aboard the battered Starfall, surrounded by wounded humans and the echoes of battle, he opened his report to the High Council. He deleted everything he had written. He stared at the blank screen for a long time. Then he wrote a single sentence. "I do not understand these beings." He could not bring himself to send it. The days after the battle were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Kethvoran had expected celebration. The humans had achieved something remarkable. Against impossible odds, they had destroyed 2 Kreeth cruisers, crippled a 3rd, and saved over 400 colonists. By any logical measure, this was a victory worth honoring. Instead, the Starfall felt like a tomb. He walked the corridors and saw crew members moving slowly, their eyes distant, their conversations muted. The laughter that had once filled the common areas was gone. The music that had played constantly was silent. Even the ship itself seemed quieter, as if the machines themselves were mourning. 61 crew members had died in the battle. 61 humans who had been alive just days ago, complaining about food and arguing about entertainment, and forming the irrational bonds that Kethvoran had once dismissed as weakness. He found Captain Grant in her quarters, hunched over her desk, writing by hand on actual paper. Her door was open, so he waited at the threshold until she looked up. "Observer," she said. Her voice was rough, tired. "What can I do for you?" "I was curious about your activity. Writing by hand is inefficient when digital methods exist." Grant looked down at the paper in front of her. "I'm writing letters to the families of the crew we lost. You have already filed official reports documenting their deaths. This is different." She set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. The movement seemed to cost her effort. An official report tells a family that their daughter or son or husband or wife is dead. A letter from me tells them who that person was, what they meant to this ship, how they died. Why is that necessary? Captain Grant studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and Keth Voran realized with surprise that she had been crying. He had not known humans could function while experiencing such strong emotions. Because they deserve to know, she said finally. Ensign Maria Cole was 22 years old. She loved old Earth music and terrible jokes, and she once spent 3 hours teaching me how to play a card game I still don't understand. She died when a Kreth boarding party breached the lower decks. She held them off long enough for her section to evacuate. Grant's voice cracked slightly. Her mother deserves to know that her daughter was a hero, that she mattered, that she won't be forgotten. She picked up her pen again. I have 60 more letters to write. Was there something else you needed? Keth Voran left without answering. He did not know what to say. He wandered the ship, observing the humans in their grief. He saw Commander Reeves sitting alone in the observation deck, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The commander stared out at the stars without moving, without drinking. He sat there for hours. In the medical bay, Sergeant Vance visited her wounded Marines every day. She knew each of their names, their home cities, their families. She sat beside their beds and talked to them about nothing important, about sports teams and childhood memories and plans for shore leave. When one of them, a young man named Private Torres, asked if he would walk again after his leg injuries, Vance held his hand and told him the truth. I don't know, she said. The doctors are doing everything they can. But I know this. Whatever happens, you're not alone. We're your family now. And family takes care of each other, Torres cried. Vance stayed with him until he fell asleep. Keth Voran approached Corporal Ruiz later that day. The medic was sitting in the common area, eating alone, his wounded shoulder wrapped in bandages. May I join you? Ruiz looked surprised but nodded. Sure. Pull up a chair. Keth Voran sat across from him, his forearms folded on the table. I have been observing the crew's behavior since the battle. I do not understand it. What's confusing you? The grief. The mourning. These emotions serve no practical purpose. The dead are dead. Expending energy on sorrow does not change that fact. Ruiz set down his fork. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Do your people not mourn their dead? We acknowledge death as a natural transition. We document the deceased's contributions and move forward. Excessive emotional response is considered primitive. Sounds lonely. It is efficient. Ruiz shook his head slowly. It sounds like you've forgotten something important. Those people who died, they weren't just crew members. They were friends. They were people who laughed with us and fought beside us and trusted us with their lives. When we mourn them, we're not being inefficient. We're remembering that they mattered. He picked up his fork again, pushing food around his plate. My grandfather died when I was 12. He was a Marine too, way back when. Served in some war I barely understood. When he passed, my grandmother cried for days. I asked my mom why, and she said something I've never forgotten. What did she say? She said that grief is love with nowhere to go. When you love someone, and they're gone, all that love is still there. But you can't give it to them anymore. So it comes out as tears, as pain, as that empty feeling in your chest. He looked at Keth Voran with those gentle eyes. We grieve because we loved them, and if we didn't grieve, it would mean we never really loved them at all. Keth Voran processed this. So grief is a consequence of emotional attachment. Grief is proof that we're human, that we care about something beyond ourselves. That night, Keth Voran attended a memorial service in the ship's main cargo bay. Someone had arranged chairs in rows, and nearly every surviving crew member was present. Captain Grant stood at the front, reading the names of the fallen, one by one. As each name was read, someone in the crowd would speak. They shared stories, memories, jokes. They laughed and cried, sometimes both at once. They held each other, these humans who had seemed so divided by rank and duty. and they mourned together. Keth Voran stood at the back, watching. He had attended thousands of ceremonies across hundreds of worlds. He had observed rituals of death in cultures spanning the galaxy. None of them had looked like this. None of them had felt like this. When the service ended, the crew did not disperse immediately. They lingered, talking in small groups, sharing drinks and embraces. Someone started playing music again, something soft and sad, and a few people began to sing. Katie Price, the young engineer he had spoken to about her pet, found him standing alone. "You look lost," she said. "I am attempting to understand." "Understand what?" "All of this." He gestured at the gathered humans. "The grief. The rituals. The songs. My people would consider this a waste of resources and time." Katie smiled. But it was a sad smile. "Maybe it is. But it's also what makes us human. We carry our dead with us. You know? Not literally. But in our hearts, we remember them, and in remembering, we keep them alive in some small way. That is not logical." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But since when is love logical? Since when is courage or kindness or sacrifice? The best parts of being human have nothing to do with logic. Observer. They have to do with heart." She touched his arm gently, a gesture of connection, and walked away to join her friends. Keth Voran stood alone in the cargo bay for a long time after everyone else had left. The chairs were empty now, the music silent, but something lingered in the air, something he could not name or measure or record. He thought about his people, the Valanthi, who had abandoned warfare and strong emotions in pursuit of efficiency. He thought about their clean ships and quiet lives, and the way they documented death without feeling it. He thought about 61 humans who had died fighting for strangers they would never meet, and for the first time in 40 years of observation, Keth Voran wondered if his people had lost something precious in their pursuit of logic. He wondered if efficiency was worth the cost. 3 weeks passed. The starfall was repaired. The wounded were healing. And life aboard the ship had slowly returned to something like normal. The humans laughed again, argued again, wasted time on games and music, and all the inefficient activities that Keth Voran had once criticized. He no longer criticized them. Something had changed inside him, though he could not identify exactly what. He found himself sitting in the common area during meals. Not just observing, but listening. He learned the names of crew members, their stories, their dreams. He discovered that Katie Price wanted to build starships of her own someday. That Corporal Ruiz wrote poetry in his spare time but was too embarrassed to share it. That Commander Reeves had a daughter back on Earth he had not seen in 2 years. They were not just subjects to study anymore. They were becoming something else. The attack came without warning. The starfall was passing through what should have been empty space when the Kreth dreadnought appeared. It was enormous. 3 times the size of the starfall, bristling with weapons that made their own armaments look like toys. It had been hiding, waiting, and now it blocked their path like a predator cornering prey. "All hands to battle stations," Captain Grant's voice rang out over the ship's speakers, calm and steady as always. "This is not a drill." Keth Voran rushed to the bridge. He had been granted access after the first battle, though he still stayed at the back, out of the way. He arrived to find the senior officers already at their stations, their faces grim. "Analysis," Grant demanded. "Dreadnought class," the tactical officer reported. "Weapons systems significantly outclass ours. Shields are stronger than anything we can penetrate. And they're jamming our communications. We can't call for help. Can we run? They're faster than us. We'd never make it to the jump point." Silence fell over the bridge. Keth Voran looked from face to face, expecting to see fear, panic, despair. He saw none of those things. He saw determination. He saw acceptance. He saw something that looked almost like peace. "Then we fight," Captain Grant said quietly, "and we make it count." She stood and faced her bridge crew. Then she activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. I'm not going to lie to you. The situation is bad. We're facing a dreadnought alone, with no backup and no way to call for help. Standard protocol would say we should surrender." She paused. "But I've never been much for protocol." A soft murmur ran through the bridge. Someone laughed. "Just once. We are the Starfall," Grant continued. "We do not go quietly. Whatever happens today, we make them remember us. We make them afraid to face another human ship. We fight so that one day, no one has to fight this battle again." Her voice grew stronger. "I have served with you for 3 years. You are the finest crew I have ever known. I am proud to stand beside you. Now let's show these bugs what humans are made of." The response was not cheering. Not exactly. It was something deeper. A sound that seemed to come from the souls of every person on the ship. They answered their captain with their voices and their hearts. And Keth Voran felt something shift in his chest that he did not understand. The battle began. It was chaos. It was terror. It was the most beautiful thing Keth Voran had ever seen. The Starfall dove and rolled through space, somehow staying alive against impossible odds. Fighters launched and engaged, buying time with their lives. Lieutenant Ben Cho led his squadron directly into the dreadnought's main weapons array, his small ship darting through defensive fire that should have been impossible to survive. "Cho, pull back," Reeves shouted. "You're too close." "Negative, Commander. I can take out their main guns. Just need to get a little closer." "Ben, you'll die." There was a pause. Then Cho's voice came back, calm and certain. "Tell my mom I love her." His fighter plunged into the dreadnought's weapon systems and detonated. The explosion tore through the enemy ship's primary armaments, leaving them crippled and struggling. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Captain Grant spoke, her voice rough. "His sacrifice will not be wasted. All weapons, target their remaining guns." In the engineering section, alarms were screaming. The reactor core had been damaged by enemy fire, and containment was failing. If it breached, the ship would be destroyed. "I need someone in the core chamber to stabilize it manually," Chief Engineer Martinez reported over the comm. "But whoever goes in there won't come back. Radiation levels are lethal." Katie Price was already moving. She had heard the report, understood the math. Someone had to go. And she was closest, most qualified, most likely to succeed. "Katie, no!" one of her friends shouted. She turned at the doorway and smiled. That same gentle smile she had given Keth Voran when she talked about her pet, about her dreams, about the ships she wanted to build someday. "Someone has to," she said. "Tell my dog I'm sorry I won't make it home." She entered the core chamber and sealed the door behind her. Through the small window, Keth Voran watched her work, her hands steady, her movements precise. As the radiation levels climbed and her skin began to redden, she stabilized the reactor. She saved the ship. She died smiling, her hand pressed against the glass. On the bridge, Captain Grant had taken a hit. Shrapnel from a console explosion had torn through her side, and blood was spreading across her uniform. She refused to leave her chair. "Status," she demanded, her voice weakening. "Dreadnought shields are failing. We have a chance, Captain." "Then take it. All weapons, everything we have. Fire." The Starfall unleashed everything it had left. Missiles and energy beams and kinetic projectiles, all focused on a single point in the dreadnought's hull. The enemy ship shuddered, cracked, and finally exploded in a blossom of fire and debris. Silence fell over the bridge. For a moment, no one moved. Then Commander Reeves spoke, his voice hushed. "We did it. We actually did it." Captain Grant slumped in her chair. Medics rushed to her side, but she waved them off long enough to look at her crew. "I knew you could," she whispered. "I knew." She lost consciousness as they carried her to the medical bay. Keth Voran helped. He did not remember deciding to help. He simply found himself carrying wounded crew members, applying pressure to wounds, doing whatever the medics told him to do. His forearms were useful for the first time since he had boarded this ship. When the rescue ships finally arrived, the Starfall was barely holding together. Over 100 crew members were dead. But the dreadnought was destroyed. and its tactical database had been recovered by a boarding team. The information would save countless lives in future battles. Kethvoran sat in the ruined bridge, surrounded by the dead and the dying and the survivors who wept for both. He thought about Katie Price and her smile. He thought about Ben Cho and his final words. He thought about Captain Grant, bleeding on her chair, refusing to fall until the fight was over. He thought about his people, the Valanthi, who had abandoned warfare because they believed it was primitive, who had chosen efficiency over emotion, logic over love, survival over sacrifice. He thought about what they had lost in making that choice. And for the first time in his long life, Kethvoran wept. The tears came from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere he had not known existed. They burned his eyes and streaked down his face, and he did not try to stop them. He finally understood what grief was. He finally understood what it meant to be human. The High Council chamber was exactly as Kethvoran remembered it. Clean lines, soft light, the pale blue glow of Valanthi elders in their elevated seats. It was a room designed for efficiency, for logical discussion, for the dispassionate exchange of information. He had never felt so out of place in his life. "Observer Kethvoran," Elder Morath said, "you have been away from the Dominion for nearly 3 months. We have received fragments of your reports, but nothing complete. You requested this audience to present your final assessment. We are listening." Kethvoran stood before them, his data tablet in one of his 4 hands. He had spent weeks preparing this presentation. He had charts, and graphs, and statistical analyses. He had tactical assessments, and cultural observations, and psychological profiles. He set the tablet down on the podium, and did not turn it on. "Elders," he began, "you assigned me to observe humans in battle, to document their military capabilities, their strategic thinking, their potential as allies or threats. I have done this. I have witnessed human warfare firsthand. I have seen them fight, and bleed, and die." He paused, looking at each council member in turn. Their faces were calm, expectant, patient. They had no idea what he was about to say. "But I cannot give you what you want. I cannot reduce humans to data points and strategic variables, because what I witnessed cannot be quantified." A murmur ran through the chamber. Elder Morath raised a hand for silence. "Explain." Kethvoran thought about Katie Price, 23 years old, an engineer who loved her pet and dreamed of building starships. She had walked into a radiation chamber, knowing she would never walk out, because someone had to, and she was there. "I watched a young woman die to save her ship," he said. "Her name was Katie Price. She was brilliant and kind, and she had her whole life ahead of her. When the reactor was failing, when someone needed to go into the core chamber to stabilize it, she did not hesitate. She knew she would die. She went anyway." He thought about Ben Cho, flying his fighter into the heart of a dreadnought. His last words, a message of love for his mother. "I watched a pilot sacrifice himself to destroy an enemy weapon system. His name was Ben Cho. He had a mother waiting for him back on Earth. He flew into certain death with her name on his lips, because his sacrifice would give his crewmates a chance to survive." He thought about Sergeant Vance, standing alone in a street filled with enemies, buying time with her blood. About Corporal Ruiz, who stayed beside her because that was what family did. "I watched soldiers hold a position against impossible odds, not because they believed they would survive, but because retreat would mean abandoning civilians they had never met. They were wounded, outnumbered, facing death, and they did not run." Elder Morath leaned forward. "These are impressive examples of human courage. But surely such behavior can be explained through evolutionary psychology, social conditioning, or chemical responses to stress." "I thought so too, at first. I documented their behavior with clinical detachment. I analyzed their actions through the lens of survival instinct and group dynamics. I believed I understood them." Kethvoran shook his head slowly. "I was wrong." He thought about Captain Lucy Grant, bleeding on her bridge, refusing to fall until the battle was won. He thought about the letters she wrote to the families of the fallen, 61 letters filled with love and memory and grief. Humans are not logical, he said. They are not efficient. They form attachments that cause them pain. They sacrifice themselves for strangers. They rage against impossible odds. They weep for their dead, and then rise to fight again. This we know, another council member said. It is why we consider them primitive. Then we are fools. Silence fell over the chamber. No one had ever spoken to the High Council this way. Kethvorin did not care. The Dominion has catalogued 10,000 species, he continued. We have ranked them by intelligence, by technological advancement, by military capacity. We have created hierarchies and assessments and strategic projections. But we have never asked the most important question, which is, what makes a species worthy? He let the question hang in the air. The elders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. We measure strength in weapons and ships. We measure intelligence in scientific achievements and technological innovation. We measure success in territory controlled and resources accumulated. By these standards, humans are unremarkable. They are not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most advanced. He stepped forward, away from the podium, closer to the council. But they are something we have forgotten how to be. And what is that? Brave, kind, loyal unto death. They carry burdens that would break us, and they carry them together. Kethvorin thought about Corporal Ruiz, explaining grief as love with nowhere to go. About Katie Price, talking about the best parts of being human, having nothing to do with logic. You asked what I witnessed during my assignment. I witnessed ordinary people become extraordinary because someone needed them. I witnessed courage that defied calculation. I witnessed love that transcended survival. He turned to face Elder Morath directly. You asked if humans are a threat. The answer is yes, but not in the way you imagine. They are not a threat to our territories, or our resources, or our political power. They are a threat to every comfortable lie we tell ourselves about what civilization means. Explain. They are a mirror. And when we look into it, we must ask ourselves, what have we become? What have we lost? Kethvorin looked around the chamber, at the clean lines and efficient design, at the calm faces of elders who had never felt strong emotion, who had never wept for the dead, or laughed with friends or loved someone so much that losing them felt like losing a part of themselves. My people abandoned warfare 10,000 years ago because we believed it was primitive. We believed peace was the highest achievement of civilization. We have spent millennia congratulating ourselves on our evolution beyond violence and strong emotion. He paused, feeling something building inside him, something that wanted to be spoken. But the humans taught me something different. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is what remains worth protecting when the war is over. And if no one is willing to protect it, if no one is willing to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, then peace is just another word for surrender. You speak as if you admire them, Elder Morath said quietly. I do more than admire them. I envy them. The words surprised him even as he spoke them. But he knew they were true. They feel things we have forgotten how to feel. They love with their whole hearts, knowing that love will bring them pain. They form families and friendships and communities that sustain them through hardship. They mourn their dead and celebrate their living, and find meaning in connections that we would dismiss as inefficient. He thought about the memorial service, the singing and crying, the way the humans had held each other in their grief. He thought about the warmth he had felt standing among them, even as an outsider. I was assigned to observe humans in battle. What I witnessed altered me completely. He bowed to the council, a gesture of respect he was not sure they deserved. I request reassignment to the human sector. Permanent assignment. There is more I need to learn. More I need to understand. Elder Morath studied him for a long moment. And if we refuse? Kethvorin met the elder's eyes without flinching. Then I will resign from the Dominion Observer Corps and find my own way back to them. Because I have finally found something worth protecting, something worth understanding, something worth being part of. The council was silent. Then, slowly, Elder Morath nodded. Your request is granted. Go back to your humans, Observer. And perhaps, one day, Teach us what you have learned. Kethvorin left the chamber without looking back. 3 weeks later, he stood in the shuttle bay of a human transport ship, waiting to board. The noise was overwhelming, humans shouting and laughing, and moving in their chaotic, inefficient way. Someone was playing music too loudly. A group of soldiers were arguing about a sporting event. A young woman was crying as she said goodbye to her family. It was messy, and loud, and completely illogical. It felt like coming home. As the shuttle lifted off, Kethvorin looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the starfall was being repaired. Captain Grant was recovering. New crew members were being assigned to replace those who had fallen. And he would be there to watch them, to learn from them, to be part of something greater than efficiency and logic and the cold calculation of survival. He would be there to be human, in whatever way a Valanthe could manage. He was ready.